Welcome back to First Things First. We're just 2 days away from the Super Bowl. Eagles and Patriots in Minnesota. Guess who else is in Minnesota? Our guy Chris Carter. CC, good morning. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning, teammates.
How was the night last night? Give us a little taste of what Minneapolis is like 2 days before Super Bowl.
It's busy now, but everyone's in town. The weather, climate hadn't changed. Your local Doppler weatherman, Chris Carter, -7 right now. The restaurants and everything are very hospitable. A lot of tunnels to walk in downtown. Stay inside, people.
I like that pin on your lapel, CC. You got any inside information about who's going to take home the Walter Payton Man of the Year this year?
I didn't.
No, there's some great candidates, though. I think that Mr. J.J. Watt and his appeal during the hurricane, I think he's one of the leading candidates. But last night we had a reception. The NFL's invited in 42 Walter Payton Man of the Year award winners. So all of us are in town. It was nice to see, some of the greats of the great, Mean Joe Green, Roger Staubach, Franco Harris. All these guys have won this award. So I won it 20 years ago. So it's a pleasure for me to be back in Minneapolis and the NFL to be honoring the Men of the Year.
It's very nice. I will admit it. I say some really dumb things sometimes, and I will tell you, I thought that was a Darth Vader pin, and I just thought it was very fancy, and I was like, good for you.
Why would he be wearing a Darth Vader
I know,
pin?
because he doesn't even like Star Wars. That's the confusion, Nick.
Okay.
That's why, but thank you for explaining, and now the Force is with everybody. All right, let's start talking football before someone tweets at me. It is the Friday before the Super Bowl. Time for us to break everything down from every angle and every vantage point. Nick Foles playing in just his third ever playoff game, trying to take down Tom Brady, who is, well, he's just Tom Brady. It's Tom Brady looking for his 6th Super Bowl win. Both quarterbacks spoke about the challenge ahead.
You know what? I don't know what the feelings will be like. I know at that moment it'll be, it's Super Bowl. So I know the only time I'll feel it are in that moment. So I'm excited to just run out of the tunnel with my teammates, Super Bowl Sunday, and play that game. I have no idea what I'll feel. I know it'll be a lot of excitement, but I look forward to that moment.
There's time to adjust, but every possession is going to be critical, and it's going to come down to the execution, as it always does. And if you're in a position to win at the end, you got to take advantage of it. And if you don't, then it's going to be a pretty crappy Sunday.
All right, CC, the Patriots are favored by 4.5 points. What do the Eagles have to do to pull off the upset?
Well, it's not that complicated as far as theory, as far as telling you. There's a couple things that they have to be concentrating on. I think the number one thing, what makes Philadelphia special, it has nothing to do with their quarterback. It has everything to do with Jim Schwartz and that defensive line. His ability to be able to keep them in the 7-man rotation. No team in the National Football League has 7 defensive linemen that played 400 snaps. They also lead the NFL in pressures. So if the quarterback is not going on the ground, and you don't have to always sack him, but there has to be real pressure, and you have to have a variety of ways to get to Tom. People talk about collapsing the pocket from the middle, but you also have to try to come up with those big plays from the outside. And if Fletcher Cox and Tim Jernigan, if they can collapse that pocket, but on the outside, Tom Brady has nowhere to escape to, I believe that's one pathway for them. They have a great defensive front. I believe it's better than New England's offensive line. Can they utilize it and take advantage of it? From an offensive standpoint, if Philadelphia is not running the ball effectively, they are 12-1 in football games where they rush the ball for 100 yards. So people say, well, it's only rushing the football. Well, this is 2 totally different teams. When they don't rush the ball for 100 yards, they score less than 19 more points. So they rush for 100 yards plus 19 points. So if they're not at 100 yards, that's not a 19-point swing that you want to see in the Super Bowl. So my concentration is 2 fronts. Their offensive line, big, strong, agile. The center, Kelsey, can get on the edge, take advantage of the running game, and the defensive front. Football games like this are won by the front. So offensive, defensive fronts of Philadelphia have to play well for them to win.
All right, to CC's point about running the football, it's 12-1, as he mentioned, when they rush for at least 100 yards. When they rush for at least 100 yards, they score 33 points per game. The 5 times they haven't, they're 3-2, and they score 14 points per game. That's the 19-point swing Chris is talking about. So there is no path to victory for the Eagles that doesn't involve Jay Ajayi, LeGarrette Blount being effective. But the other reason running the football has been so critical is because of their defensive line. And because you can be fresh because you have a defensive line rotation, you can be extra fresh because you are staying off the field. Why did the Falcons wilt down the stretch last year? Yes, there was bad offensive play calling. Yes, they had key turnovers and penalties in the wrong spot. But also what happened when Brady played essentially a flawless fourth quarter, he had been under duress throughout the first 2.5 quarters of the game, and then he wasn't in the last quarter and a half of the game. Why? Because the D-line for the Falcons was exhausted. How can you keep your D-line fresh? We talk about the rotation, but it's also running the football to dominate time of possession. In the regular season, in the games with Carson Wentz, the Eagles had about a 33-minute time of possession. In the regular season, in games without Carson Wentz, when they looked like a totally different team, that time of possession was down to 27 minutes. Now in the playoffs, when they've been successful, it's back up to 33 minutes. CC, you often point out you got to hold on to the ball for an underdog like this, 32 to 34 minutes. That is exactly in like the Goldilocks zone, the perfect zone for them to be able to win this football game. And then the other thing the Eagles desperately need in this game is Zach Ertz to make plays. Now, I think the Patriots will treat Zach Ertz similarly to how they treated Julio Jones in last year's Super Bowl. They will identify him as the most dynamic playmaker on the other team and say, we are going to try to take you out of the game. They held Julio to 60 yards receiving until that amazing catch down the sidelines. Still, he only had 4 catches in last year's Super Bowl. The Eagles don't have enough big play guys to lose the production of Zach Ertz and still score enough points to win this football game.
Nick, I think you make a great point, especially as far as third down. And if you listen to Tom Brady's press conference, I don't like the fact that Nick Foles, he's just living in the moment. Well, I don't know how I'm going to feel out there. Well, we know that. You've never been to the Super Bowl. But Tom Brady specifically pointing out how every possession is so valuable in the Super Bowl. And there were a lot of factors to why Atlanta lost last year's Super Bowl, but none more critical than their third down and inability on third down to get off the field. So if I talked about the running game in Philadelphia. I talked about the defensive front. But Nick Foles, the last 4 games at the quarterback, don't put the pressure under him. Philadelphia's third down defense has been amazing. First of all, they've only given up 8.3 points in those 4 games and 33% on third down. So, Nick, if they continue that type of success, this is how the Eagles are going to pull off this monumental upset.
Let me ask you a question, Cece. We talk about this Eagles team as being such overwhelming, underdogs here. And I'd like to think a lot of that is just because of Nick Foles, because of the Patriots' prior 7 Super Bowls, Super Bowl opponents. None of them have had a top 5 scoring offense and a top 5 scoring defense like the Eagles have. So is it just Nick Foles that is putting them at this disadvantage?
Well, Nick Foles is one of the subplots of the story. But also if you look at Belichick, if you look at Tom Brady, how Tom's been playing, all these things are a factor. But people, they just are missing that this is a very good football team. They have a great roster. They have a lot of talent. And the thing that they're good where New England's not good. Their defensive line is so much better than New England's defensive line. Their offensive lines are Philadelphia is so much better. So in the things that are very, very important, they're not real sexy to talk about them, but it's very important when you're trying to win games like this. I don't think people have them as an overwhelming underdog. That's why the point spread is only 4.5.
That's
and if Carson Wentz was playing in the game, then as Nick pointed out, Philadelphia would probably be the favorite.
The reason, though, even though they are only 4-point underdogs, it feels like it would be, to use your term, a monumental upset, is because of the quarterbacks. Like, we look at it and we say, oh, it should be a close game. Like, I think most people, it's weird. I think most people are like, oh, it'll be a close game, but of course New England will win. And part of that's just because our recency bias that, again, the Pats in the last 4 years have lost one playoff game. And the one playoff game they lost, it took a missed extra point and then a failed 2-point conversion for them to not get to overtime. They have had so much success in the playoffs over the last few years, it's hard for us to envision, oh yeah, Nick Foles is going to go beat them, even though it's the full roster. I'm going to mention one kind of in the weeds thing the Eagles have to do. They've done it better this year than any team in football. No team in football has given up fewer points in the final 2 minutes of the first half than the Philadelphia Eagles. Not surprisingly, once again, the Patriots were one of the very best in the league in that situation. One of the reasons the Pats like to defer is because they're so good at scoring before the end of the half. Then they get the ball back to start the second half. They score again. It can be an enormous swing in the game. The Eagles cannot give up points right before the half the way Jacksonville did. That's where that game turned. That game was 14-3. Jacksonville was cruising. They get a delay of game that forces them to punt instead of holding on to the ball. The Pats get the ball inside 2 minutes. What do? Boom, boom, boom. Now all of a sudden it's 14-10, and we have a football game on our hands. The Eagles have to stay true to what they've been doing at the end of first halves, which is running their offense properly to prevent the other team from getting the ball back. And if the other team does get the ball back, stiffening and keeping them out of the end zone. That is an enormous key to this football game.
Nick, I'm with you as far as finishing. When we're watching New England play, you sit there, you're like, I don't believe this team. It's amazing how many points they score or how teams get conservative, give them the ball back before halftime, and then they end up getting some points. But what I think is just as important as halftime, Nick, is how they start the game. You talked about earlier in the week, the last 2 playoff games, Doug Peters, he has been very aggressive, throwing the ball deep down the football field. They need to get off to that start. Let's not forget, New England has all the experience. 7 Super Bowls. They have scored no points in the first quarter. That's hard to imagine that in Game 8 they don't score. So we need the Eagles, the cliche, they need to get off to a fast start and a fast finish to the first half.
All right, CC, hang out. Coming up, who is the one X factor no one's talking about this weekend? That's next on First Things First.
Throwing up the X? You know who does that? Your favorite receiver.
Welcome to the world,